What did he teach us? He taught us that poetry was designed to rearrange a few of your molecules. He taught us that writing was more important than being a writer. He taught us to take our work seriously, but not to take ourselves the wrong kind of seriously. He made everyone around him better.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Clewell. I am the son of David Clewell, and for the last 24 years of my life, I've been so grateful to have my dad as my dad, as a human being, as a teacher, and as an incredible writer in my house. Tonight I'm going to be reading 3 poems from Almost Nothing to Be Scared of and The Low End of Higher Things. The first poem here is called In the Extreme. I was young when I first experienced the danger of extremes. What later on I'd come to know by their familiar names: feast or famine, hell or high water, all or nothing's wide variety of guises and occasions. I learned that lesson over and over at my family's bathroom sink, so unlike any other sink I'd ever stood before. Hot water faucet on the left, cold water faucet on the right. I found out early on that neither of them alone was going to suffice. So I tried flitting my hand back and forth, pausing in the middle, hoping for anything easier to weather. Not so tropical heat, not so icy Arctic circle, but no compromise seemed possible. I could stare in the mirror, stalling for time, but again and again I had to choose between hot on one hand and cold on the other. Even Hamlet's self-absorbed dilemma was a cinch compared to mine. Yes, not to be was surely an extreme, but maybe just a bit dramatic too, considering his princely circumstances. All he really had to do was be. And for the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, I bet he never had to reckon with the same 2 every morning of his life before breakfast. To be scalded or not scalded, that was always the more immediately worrisome question. And when my parents finally updated in that one small way, at least I oddly came to miss the regular hand-wringing over how best to carry out my daily perilous ablutions. Thank you. Inside the Eagle, waiting his turn, Buzz Aldrin can't believe what he's just heard. Did he just say one small step for man? I told him it had to be for a man, or else that mankind bit seems absolutely senseless. Any notion of symmetry and scale? It's shot to hell, to say nothing of humility, the stepping, the leaping, the one guy, the many. Like every gung-ho flyboy, he's at his best in the air. He's not used to saying much. That doesn't come out banged up on the ground. He made it to the goddamn moon, and with some 600 million people watching on TV, he flubs the one line he couldn't stop rehearsing all the way out there. The 6 hours since we landed, going nowhere, gave him far too much time to dwell on his brief moment in the reflected sun. He should have just made something up entirely new on the spot, where he could actually feel the gravity of the situation. Just 1/6 of any he'd ever known before. Something lighter, maybe, when he could finally see the first impressions here wouldn't carry too much weight. I realized the name Armstrong has a ring that Buzz can't muster, a certain all-American sonority that made him the obvious choice to step first into the staggering historical occasion. Yeah, he got us to tranquility by hand, overriding the onboard computer when we were running scared and low on fuel, skirting an impossibly rocky crash landing. But still, I really should have put my foot down before something like this happened. History always has a way of forgetting the kind of man who's second on the scene. But this isn't exactly the toughest act to follow. I could still be the first man on the moon to walk and make grammatical sense at the same time. Let Armstrong make the obligatory long-distance small talk with Nixon, who's not about to miss out on his gratuitous piece of the action. He'll come on the line with his self-important locker room voice insisting, "We really kicked some Russian butt out there tonight," unless, at the giddy height of his power, and at least a few sheets to his favor, when he ends up saying "some Russians' butt" instead, which would make it even more limited of a triumph, but luckily nothing less than truly the aim of the operation all along. And finally, owing up to that much, no matter who or how imperfectly, would have to go down is one small step in the right direction. But remember, even after I've struck what's left of this lunar paid dirt myself, you didn't hear that, or even anything close to that, from me. In 1963, I had to write 1,000 words. And not just any 1,000 words, but what Miss Higgins called an essay. The first time in my grade school life I'd heard that dreaded word, explaining how at last I had learned my lesson. No more disruptions in our classroom, no more talking out of turn, as if whatever I had to say was far more important than what any other kid was coming up with. And I remember thinking at the time how 1,000 of anything had to be a lot. 1,000 miles, 1,000 years, 1,000 pieces of bazooka. So really 1,000 words in a row? After Miss Higgins said that if I chose to write a poem instead, well, maybe then she wouldn't bother counting up the words. She figured that me trying any poem, no matter how long it was or it wasn't, would prove undoubtedly to be punishment enough. Yes, I was young, but I wasn't stupid. I took the poem, and no, it wasn't very good, but at least Debbie Fuller was in it, and I have to say I liked that part. 50 years later, I still haven't learned. I'm still talking out of turn and insisting on poems? Every one of them asking in so many words, punishment for whom? Miss Higgins of the 1,000 words? Miss Higgins of the fiendish Plan B? Are you there? I've even written poems 1,000 words long and longer, but not this one. You and I had a deal. My uncompromising reader there at the beginning, never less than tough on me. What I really want to know is if you had enough yet?
Hi, my name's Kate Wylie. I'm a 2018 Webster University grad, a student of David Clewell's, and a close family friend. Today I'm going to be reading The Collector from The Low End of Higher Things. After putting in a full 8 hours and coming up short in towns where I'd found success on previous flea market Saturdays, not a single blue manifestation of Charlie the tuna in his elusive plastic glory, no telltale ready kilowatt zigzag embodiment of energy and action, no electricity in the air, no cool, so bad they're good ceramic beatnik daddios, no yellowing crazy cat or pogo in their threadbare Sunday funnies best, no worn out of this world copy of those sexy saucer people discarded for not exactly living up to its complicated front cover promise, no promising anything that needed my saving for the rest of the day or for good. I walked oddly unencumbered through the twilight parking lot with my son, who, in his ancient 4-year-old's wisdom that comes from living a life much closer to the ground, seized on an empty box of Good and Plenty and made his trademark declaration. I collect these, you know. He arrives at decisions like that in an instant, and unfailingly, they become him until there's no going back to whoever he was before. And my part, as always, to carry it home, safe in my pocket. The driver, the courier, the muscle, the mule. to smuggle it in violet across some invisible border to where it absolutely matters again. His is not the standard collector's zeal, some nearly impossible quest for completeness, the one missing piece by now larger than life, where condition, they say, is everything. It's nothing he'll spend whole days or nights or years on, curatorially speaking. This is about a more haphazard accrual, a steady accumulation with no discernible shape, save that it's so easily accommodated in his wide open mind's eye. You know, I need this for my sculpture that never ends. His pursuit is effortless, a masterpiece of circumstance and sheer improvisation, like Coltrane at the Village Vanguard, picking up a tune of no particular note and blowing it inside out, the fiercest declaration on record of my favorite things. My son knows by heart how that one goes. Every day, he's that alive, working on another small piece of his world, counting it off, already dressed and hurrying through breakfast, looking to come in so true and so sure that this time it will stay played his way forever. He's got the chops already for the solo of a lifetime. Even now, he's stretching out, making it up and laying it down as he goes along, riff by breathless riff. And surely, his best guesses are as good as any in the one museum display he can't get enough of. Skeletons of ghost white bones made up to look like dinosaurs. Those staggering creatures we're actually supposed to believe once walked the earth, this way or that, until something even bigger that no one can agree on came along from out of nowhere, and there was no way they could save their suddenly puny selves. The museum calls this a highlight of its permanent collection, but no matter how skillful the arrangement, how aesthetically pleasing, always what's missing is a certain assurance that says this really counted once for something. We need to witness the weight of conviction flushed out before our eyes, some bleeding beyond the bare bones recollection of an earlier place or self or catastrophic season that, at last, isn't otherwise humanly possible. Here, on his small red table in the living room tonight, a pine cone, a feather, a scrap of aluminum foil, a key, a long way from whatever it opens, a row of mismatched buttons. When he says, I belong to them, I know they mean the world, and he is there for them for keeps. Even now, on his long way into sleep, he knows every one of his secret pleasures is safe with me. There's never a day he walks away from empty-handed. Sometimes that kind of power falls into the wrong hands. Folks who can't ever have enough Hummel figurines or angels or Elvis on black velvet. And what exactly are those salt and pepper shaker people thinking? Leigh Hunt spent a lifetime assembling his album of famous human hair, but he was one of those hopeless romantics and should be pardoned accordingly. My fellow flea marketeer, Ernie, world-renowned sculptor, unloaded his trove of kitschy 1950s space-age lamps on me. Can you believe I'm now collecting celebrity shoes? This was years ago, and I believed him because I wanted to believe anyone can always make room for a few more needs of his own choosing. Because sooner or later there's world enough we have too little say in. Because we're better off knowing the name of anything we're not looking for. Between my son and the woman who bore him, who bears herself up so gracefully under the weight of whatever her boys are lugging home these days, I have so much already. But I'll be setting my Charlie the Tuna alarm clock for us all because I still want days like tomorrow, when Ben will wake up, running full tilt again into the living room daylight, illuminating his small share of the planet he laid out on display so carefully the night before. Believe me, no one could be more delighted that it's still, all of it, there. And when he looks down from the unassuming height of his young powers at what he's managed to make of his life so far, he will see that it is good. And there is plenty more he'd like everyone to know where this came from.
My name is Katie Erbs, and I'm a poet and a 2017 graduate of Webster University and a student of David's. Today I'm going to be reading Desperate Measures from the Low End of Higher Things. Desperate Measures. Charles Bolton, aka Black Bart, robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches, often leaving a taunting verse in the plundered strongbox. Upon his release from San Quentin, he assured the warden that his life of crime was over. Asked if he was still going to write poetry, Bolton said, "I repeat, sir, I am through with my life of crime." From Black Bart, Shotgun Poet. Part of me feels really bad about this, but it's too late. There's no turning back now. Here comes another no-account poem that someone with nothing to lose is waving in your face, and it's time to reach for the blue sky again. Sadly, there's no way of knowing if the poem is actually loaded or not. It could be just a bar of soap, carved into the plausible shape of a poem, or a dime store water pistol, knockoff of the real thing. Although history doesn't seem to favor jumping to those reckless conclusions. I say, better to play it safe. No one's going to get hurt today, if you listen carefully. Remember the cardinal rule the boss recited on your first night of clerking at the Gas and Go. There's no arguing with a poem. It's too easy to get messed up. And for what? When you get right down to it, give the guy with the poem anything he asks for. Whatever you do, please don't misunderstand what this is all about. I want the full attention of your life, right up to this nerve-wracking moment. Give me everything you've got. Don't be caught dead on the business end of an extended metaphor. This is what happens when an unwitting public crosses over into literature's high-crime neighborhood. Although I'm guessing you have at least some pop-gun verse of your own holstered, conveniently within reach. These days, who isn't packing a version of Poetry Heat? You wanted to feel the sensation of running just once with the wrong crowd. Don't even think about it if you know what's good. I have bigger things still in my coat pocket, a ballad that doesn't know when to quit, or an epic and heroic couplets that would absolutely blow you away. So don't go somehow thinking the world needs your heroics too. Now step away from this page nice and slow. There's no cause for alarm. You've stared down the dark barrel of sawed-off inspiration long enough, and you're going to live to tell about it, for all the good that does. As far as anyone else is concerned, this whole thing never happened. It never really does. Later, you can file a report with the glassy-eyed desk cop or your local community college professor of English. They're not about to put a stop to any of this senseless poetry violence. They've been on the take for years, paid to look the other way. They need the small-time, good-for-nothing hoodlum likes of me. I'm their business, and that's not saying much, but it's a modest living for us all. I can promise you this. It won't be long until I'm giving myself up to the authorities again, to anyone who'll listen. And as usual, they'll have no idea what in the world I'm talking about. That's why I need you out there. That's why I'm letting you go. I'm telling you word for adamant word what I told you the last time. Generally, I work alone, so this has to be the end of the line, where we take one last deep breath together before making our separate treks back into the silence. Each of us imagining what we just got away with, at least for another few minutes in the middle of our unsuspected lives.
David was a mentor, a colleague, a friend, a neighbor, and a brother in the arms of poetry, or in poetic arms. I'm going to read a poem of his from the low end of Higher Things titled, "On the Eve of His Retirement, the Weight Guesser Goes All Out." For the Jersey Shore boardwalkers, circa 1975, and for the great detecto himself. In her fortune teller's booth, Madame Starlight pretends to traffic in some version of a future no one ever saw coming. But she's just 5 minutes ahead, right past Momo the monster, this side of the tilt-a-whirl. She's not about to tell you anything you don't already know. She'll be reading you cold. And it's nothing personal, some you've been lucky in love, topped off with, but not always. And she can't lose. Even as we speak, someone's paying way too much again to be that unbelievably amazed by not nearly enough. You could do a whole lot better yourself, no matter whose hand you suddenly were holding. Forget her. Forget everything that comes after what I'm about to tell you. The bumper cars, the ring toss, the inscrutable wheel of fortune. Forget especially the 3 milk bottles. You could throw at those until you drop, never guessing your own strength. I'm risking my good name, lifted straight from the scale, a precision instrument that really can substantiate the one thing I'm here to say. Believe me, the great detecto can't possibly crystallize a single wisp of the future. This is about you and me right now, old-fashioned science and arithmetic in action. And because you have to give me 2 pounds, high or low, the target's bigger than it seems. The bowler trying to pick up the 5-pin imagines the fat middle of the pin itself, but his margin's actually the diameter of the ball to either side. It's not that tough when you think about it, standing there alone like that. Guessing any man's a snap. Like dragging Main Street on Saturday at noon, no hands on the wheel. There's not one curve or hairpin turn that needs negotiating. Women I approach from another direction entirely. I make sure to come in low, some crazy airplane kind of guess, flying underneath the radar, so they'll be less inclined to give themselves away by stepping onto the scale and proving once again and for all how far I can go wrong. Not for the ridiculously puny stuffed animal they'd get to walk away with. There's very little chance in the equation. This is a one-shot game of skill, and I'm the only one who can play. So whether or not I'm mostly on the $1 money, there aren't people hanging around all night, showing off or going broke, trying to impress what's left of their wives or the up-for-grabs boardwalk girls. There's no trading up for anything bigger, softer, better. There's no better luck next time. This isn't some clown shouting insults like fathead or bag of bones from his seat above the laughable tank of water, and you can buy all the chances you need to drown him out with maybe just one lucky throw. Lit up in this unrelenting neon hubba-hubba, it's no wonder people can't help themselves. My job's to insist they are exactly who they are, but only once. I'm the expert weighing in again, telling them what that means in pounds, the surest measure I know of the way a life accumulates. I say, this is how much of you matters tonight. I say, you've got absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. And if they'll truly feel more satisfaction in going away empty-handed. And even when occasionally I miss my guess, whatever's stuffed stays stuffed forever in their no less disappointed hands. I've done the best I can do. They have at least that to carry with them. But I've got to be honest. Most nights, I'm so good it hurts. Just ask Madame Starlight, lately unlucky in making her customary small fortune, but not always. Her future here looks more promising without the predictably uninventive killjoy likes of me. I'm gonna miss this crazy life on the edge of the only world there is. Most of all, the ocean at my back, swelling, rising, cresting, curling on itself until it breaks. That thunder in the surf drowning out another day's inconsequential noise over and over, thousands of pounds of elemental grace under pressure. Next to that kind of power, anything we have to say is a word scrawled fast in the sand, and poof, we're gone. And whatever's left behind is swallowed up, goes out to sea for a while, until it all comes crashing back in again. Maybe changed, but no less broken. One more absurd picnic gone irretrievably to ruin. Stare at the flotsam long enough, and it sure enough takes on the unmistakable size and shape of just one person, wrecked on grief's high tide, knocked headlong in the undertow of desire. These are the ancient barnacled sorrows that follow us when we first bellied out of the water, grew legs, and walked away upright, trying never to look back. There are those days that get to us. We're down on our knees again, and here comes some wave that's been building for so long that by now it's packing the weight of the world, and that's what we'll be feeling. I'm afraid that's how we'd put it, too, if only we had the wind. Right here is where that's undeniably measured. For the next few hours at least, breath by goddamn living breath. I'm sizing it up for everyone, in the blood, in the bone, in what passes finally for resolve, in the muscle of the jaw, in the neurons firing a few more desperate rounds before the swinging door in the brain comes unhinged completely. Brick by human brick, the weight of the world is so much more than any watery figure of speech. It's easily as real as your astonished face. It's anybody's guess. And I've always said there's nothing to it. You give me a lifetime in either direction, high or low, and I can't miss. Tonight, your dollar's in good hands. But tomorrow, none of this is any of my business. Tomorrow, like it or not, your guess is as good as mine.
I'm Murray Farish. I'm the chair of the English department at Webster University, and I was David's student and his colleague and his friend for 25 years. And I'm still not sure if this is a true story or not. The poem I'm going to read to you is from David's 2011 book, Taken Somehow by Surprise. The poem's called Albert Einstein Held Me in His Arms. Albert Einstein held me in his arms. Although my parents didn't know it at the time, and if I knew anything, even on some vaguely molecular level, I surely wasn't talking. No one was the wiser, except for Einstein, of course, taken with my small charms. He was crazy about how I couldn't stop smiling, drooling in my carriage on a Sunday afternoon in Princeton, the town my mother loved just driving to and getting out and losing herself in, absolutely smitten. And my pedestrian father was crazy about my mother, so even if that meant another goddamn trip to Highfalutinsville, New Jersey, he'd be there without fail, forever, along for the ride. The way I finally heard it, Einstein was on his knees in a sweatshirt, rumpled chinos, and sneakers, pulling weeds, merely being himself, my father would say later, utterly impressed. Einstein had that down to a science at 112 Mercer, the unassuming white frame house where he cultivated flowers, where he played the violin precisely in sync with his favorite recordings late into the night, where he famously met with Bertrand Russell, Kurt Gödel, and Wolfgang Pauli for philosophic forays into the schnapps, then inevitably higher mathematics. But on that one historic Sunday in the spring of my first year, Einstein himself welcomed the unrenowned likes of my mother and father. This 20th century giant picked me up with some easy peekaboo small talk in the last of the afternoon's fading light until eventually, genius or no genius, I couldn't take it anymore, and I made a tiny grab for his wildly theoretical hair. And that was pretty much the end of our ad hoc civilization that flourished for 10 Princeton minutes. When Einstein died, only 6 weeks later, every newspaper ran his picture, and all at once my father couldn't believe it. Wasn't that the gardener who couldn't get enough of the baby? It says right here, he's Einstein, the guy who revolutionized our thinking about time and space. And what was that supposed to mean to him exactly? My father wasn't Einstein, but he thought a lot about time and space too, deciding in his lifetime he wasn't about to get enough of either one. For years, my parents never said a word about that day, as if to remember it out loud would have been somehow unseemly, a kind of bragging they never much went in for, rather than a celebration of wonderful dumb luck Sunday driving, like every happy accident in the history of science or in those classic, unlikely stories we can't help going back to for their mythic staying power. So now let me put it this way. Albert Einstein held me in his arms before he died. Sooner or later, we're all trying to explain our particle selves in light of our own outlandish theories of relativity. Someone in my family, my mother or my father, maybe me, had to embellish at least some of the truth that comes finally here at the end. My mother's horrified that I've yanked poor Einstein's hair, and she resigns herself, sighing, "It's time to go." To prove there are no hard feelings, he says something Einsteinian like, "Yes, but what is time?" which my father misunderstands as a question he can actually answer at that very minute. So he says 5 o'clock. And before I know it, because I'm far too young to realize much of anything, everyone's in a sudden hurry back into their uncertain futures, as if this whole thing never quite honestly happened. And in no time, it's 50 years later, and I'm the one still alive, all that's left of the story, telling myself, yes, it did. No, it didn't. No, it did.
There are some days that seem so awfully long. You're thinking whiskey, but you're thinking wrong. There's no time to go soft. Instead, think strong. Black coffee, a whole pie. It's kick-ass song. Don't take the edge off ever. Bring it on until your heart beats back where it belongs, to what's alive, still going on.